All right, everyone. My name is Carrie McKillip. I am facilitating our program this afternoon. I'm with the University of Illinois Extension. I also serve as Eden's chair-elect, and we're going to be talking this afternoon about Extension's response to the spring floods of 2019 that for many of us seem to be turning into early summer floods of 2019 as well. We do have 4 speakers today, so we're going to get started here right on time. I want to let everyone know that your microphones are muted. If you have questions for presenters, feel free to put them in the chat box. We will hold all the questions until the end. And then we will try to reserve enough time to cover all of the questions. So we're going to start today with Tom Ball, who is a government training officer with Mississippi State University Extension. And Mississippi State has been in disaster mode since about February, if I understand correctly. So I will turn it over to Tom to get us started. Tom, it's all yours.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you all for participating in the webinar this afternoon. I am reminded of a newspaper story about what we all considered dramatic flooding in our state during the 1979 Easter weekend, and the lead to the story was, "A man's home is his castle, even if it's under 6 feet of water." Well, today I can tell you that there are quite a few Mississippians with underwater castles. Since we experienced severe weather that prompted flooding and dramatic winds and even a tornado in February, we have been in emergency response and recovery mode. I'm saying that because the state of Mississippi does not have a presidential declaration of a state of Mississippi because there's so much damage and it's continuing damage because of the floodwaters. We have 8 counties of our 82 counties that are today with a presidential declaration. 24 others are compiling damage assessments for submission to the regional FEMA folks, and about a half dozen more will be surveyed when water levels recede to the point where, travel's possible. But no county, despite all of the things that we have just described, none of our counties have individual assistance from the federal government at this time. There's no SBA program at this time. There's no FSA program at this time, but most county FSA offices are accepting applications and using the damage assessment reports that have been compiled in large measure by extension educators and professionals going out in the field. So without being overly dramatic, we're doing this on our own with assistance from our VOADs and COADs and our non-governmentals, but we have missed our federal partners significantly in these situations because these are devastating and persistent emergencies because of the water and wind. When you have lost your home, when you've been in a situation where you cannot perform your normal business functions, when you can't do those things that are a part of your life, it has a great impact on your community, on the state itself, but most assuredly your families. Well, MSU Extension has taken it on itself to be that stopgap emergency help. We have provided educators to serve as county shelter leadership. One of our county longtime agents in South Mississippi is running the regional sheltering operation for those in South Mississippi that were inundated with approximately 40 inches of rain over a weekend a week ago. And that is no small accomplishment. Now, again, she is coordinating and helping and working with Red Cross and other NGOs and local county faith-based people, but she's in charge. And we've also done ag damage assessments by the use of drones, and that was a new one for me. Extension had never done that before. We've offered engineering consultation to cities and counties for the repair and restoration of roads and bridges. We have done things that help the individual families, identifying, inspecting food supplies, canned goods, things that were still damaged by the rain and the flooding, but that were serviceable and could be used as nutritious food. We worked on the blue tarps and did the things, and even one FCS agent assisted in animal rescue and helped with the bottle feeding of a young livestock. So, I mean, we're not different than Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, all those people in the Midwest that are suffering from Old Testament type flooding. We're just continually fighting that battle. And it's a battle that we have fought with the aid of the administration, who have assigned county professionals and educators from across regional divides to support the ongoing programming that Extension. We still do all of those things that everyone knows about, but we're doing those sheltering operations and regular Extension work. We're doing animal rescue. We're doing those damage assessments. We're doing this out of the county level because there is no declaration other than the state. So we're spending our own money in doing this. And so we're trying to maintain that type of approach, a county emergency operations committee. We are certainly ICS, Instant Command System, versed, and Howard Hilba and myself, we are all trained in those niceties. But we're doing this at the local level because there's no hope or possibility of federal funding for this. So everyone from the research and education extension centers down to the county offices up to administration, we're spending our money doing these things for our clients and our citizens out in trying to save operations and to trying to make sure that we don't lose communities and villages that may never be replaced. In going forward, we're going to try to make sure that we meet all of the obligations that we have for continuing extension operations, but we're fighting 300,000 acres of flooded Delta farmland that is prime corn and soybean acreage. We're doing those things to help restore community life where possible. Working with COEDs and VOEDs, and most assuredly long-term recovery when it happens. But all of those things are still in the ongoing process for evaluation because we do not have a presidential declaration for the entirety of the state, nor do we have any federal funds or mission assignments for guaranteed reimbursement. We're working with producers. We're trying to make sure that the FSA has the information that they need to make a determination on emergency program offerings. So we are continuing to do those things every day that Extension does and gets sometimes not enough notice for. But we're trying to do those things also to get us to a position where we can find normalcy for our constituents on the western part of the state and the southern part of the state that have been greatly impacted, but as well as that, working with producers and timber farmers throughout the state that have lost market value for their crops, and that is a lasting impact, not a singular year event. I have great faith that we're going to win this battle. I am going to tell you that federal assistance will eventually come, and support for the operations that we have been performing will be noticed and recorded. And I think that the possibility is that Extension will come out with a better recognition and a better appreciation for the task that we do each and every day, because we rose to the occasion to meet the needs of our clients and citizens during this ongoing emergency. I appreciate your attention, and at the conclusion, I will certainly welcome the opportunity to ask any or answer any questions that you may have. Thanks, Carrie.
Okay, I'm sorry, folks. I unmuted myself. Abby had me muted. So we will thank you, Tom, and we will move on now to Jim Crawford, who is a field specialist in agricultural engineering in Missouri, and he is up in Atchison County, which is in northwest Missouri, and we will turn it over to you, Jim, to find out what Iowa State University has been doing. Or I'm sorry, Missouri has been doing. I got too many names in the fire here.
It's a line on the map. It's 10 miles north of us, so it's not that big a deal.
Yes. So, and I know you all have been inundated up there. We will turn it over to you to tell us how Missouri has been handling the spring. Thank you.
All right. Who's advancing the slides?
Abby will take care of your slides for you.
All right. Move forward. She can't see me nodding my head. She can't see me. Next slide. And you can just go ahead and punch this until all the details are up on there. One reason I want to put a quick background up there is this caught everybody in the state by complete surprise. We do not flood in March. March is something we're worried about, snowstorms, not flooding. It caught everybody completely unprepared. And the time frame we had on this, we kind of got spoiled when we flooded in 2011. We had 4 weeks to prepare for it. We knew it was coming. This one went from, hey, you guys might want to pay attention. On March 14th, we got an alert from the Weather Service that, hey, the river may come up. So we planned a countywide flood meeting for the morning of the 15th, by which time they said, you're going to flood. It doesn't matter. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how soon. How soon was the next day. By the 18th, most of the levees had been breached or overtopped in northwest Missouri. The 21st, it reaches maximum depth of water. And today we still have over half of that initial flooded area is underwater. And from all predictions, it's going to be underwater probably at least through Halloween. There's a lot of water out there, a lot of breaches, and they're still letting a lot of water out. Next one, please. It hit the 5 counties in northwest Missouri along the river first. Unfortunately, there's not a tremendous population up there except for St. Joseph, and it took a long time for us to get a state declaration until we met those criteria. We finally got our federal declaration yesterday, and that was only because the Mississippi is now flooding St. Louis and some of those areas. So we, just like Mississippi, we've been kind of going at it on our own on some of these aspects. We have the state declaration. We did get the declaration from the emergency from the FSA about a month ago, which again, this is time of year when it's hard. We can't even get out there to assess the damage in a lot of areas. Water has gone down, but this is our second 500-year flood in 8 years, which means I'm over 1,000 years old, so I feel pretty good for my age. But the water levels this time were much higher. There were record heights after the flood of 2011. Things that were rebuilt, we built them above what was flood level, and we had anywhere from 4 to 5 feet of water above the new floodlight. So this is just an unprecedented flooding. These 5 counties alone, we had over 200,000 acres flooded. We still have about 100,000 of those flooded now, over 1,000 homes. Again, this is mostly rural areas that were flooded, so it was pretty devastating to these areas on a local basis. They always say emergencies are local. This one was. All disasters are local, and this one definitely was. If you go to the next page, here's just some statistics on Atchison County, which is the very northwest. We border Nebraska and Iowa, and you can see that light area between Interstate 29 and the Missouri River is our bottom ground. There's about 85,000 acres there. We estimate that 70,000 plus were flooded. The interstate was cut for the first time since it was built in 1969, and we still have over 35,000 acres flooded there. If you go to the next slide, you can see all the dots are breaches on the federal levees. And the following picture, we, like a lot of you, our streams across the bottom are levied at the same area, at the same height as the federal levees, which makes basically watertight compartments on the bottom. Well, hit next, please. Those levees breached too out in the middle. So everything flooded on the bottom, and now the water that is out there, the inlets are the same height as the river level, but the outlets are about 2 feet higher. So the water can't get out. And every time the river comes up, things reflood. And the final picture. This is a road map. All the roads in red are roads that are still closed, mostly because they're underwater or parts of them are underwater. Some of them we anticipate will not be opened again until probably Halloween, because we can't even get to them to assess them, as well as the houses. We're still taking boats out to check houses and things like that. So this is an ongoing disaster, if you will. The next slide. As you expect, homes, cities, agriculture, whether it's commercial or private, roads. This is still the main east-west road that's showed there. A lot of businesses suffered. The interstate was cut. So a lot of things have been impacted there. Schools, we had 2 schools that flooded, so they had to relocate where they were doing having classes at. Even the University Research Center, which is located on the bottom, it flooded as well. There were over 1,200 ag buildings in the county that were flooded. We're estimating that they're probably close to between 70 and 100,000 acres won't be planted in this county alone. And we lost about 750,000 bushels of grain between Atchison, Holt, and Buchanan counties that were in grain bins. That doesn't count the commercial storage. The picture you saw earlier had about 4 million bushels. So it's been pretty devastating. One big impact people don't understand on employment is where we're located. A lot of people live in Nebraska, work in Missouri, or vice versa. All the bridges are cut. It's now what used to be a 20-minute drive is better than a 2-hour drive. You have to go to Omaha or St. Joseph. You can get across at Nebraska City now as well. But that has really destroyed a lot of jobs in the area. When you look at our next slide, I talk about our responses. And to me, it really begins with, we have a seat on the county emergency boards in our state. We are recognized by SEMA and the governor's office as a partner in emergency planning. And that is really a huge benefit because we're there at the initial outset. We know when things are going to happen. Our input is appreciated. We're looked at as a partner, not somebody who can come in afterwards to provide services. We transitioned. We had a long-term recovery committee from the floods of 2011 that we were able to quickly translate over to a short-term committee so we could start taking cash donations, food, things like that within just a couple of hours of transitioning that committee over. We held public service meetings within the first couple of weeks of flooding. They were actually delayed, and I'll talk about that a little bit, how we're going to address that for the future. But to make sure everybody had housing, food, shelter, clothes, things like that. There were a lot of people who were displaced. Of course, then we had the marks, and we also were able to organize and participate in 2 USDA meetings with DNR, FSA, Department of Ag, NRCS, FSA, to start getting the information out to the producers of what they can do to recover their farm ground. I worked with DNR to come up with a fact sheet of what to do with the grain that was damaged, how to dispose of that. We've been working with all the different government agencies to make sure that the needs are met of the people, to put them in touch with the proper resources. Lots of one-on-ones, which we all do. That's what Extension is. Extension is one-on-one. Those have, I won't say really just started, but those have been ongoing, and as the water goes off and we have an opportunity to get to more homes, more businesses, more fields, those are going to continue. And we anticipate, we were just now getting some fields back into normal production from the 2011 floods. So we look at this as going to be just an ongoing thing that we're going to deal with for many, many years. If you'll flip the slide, what worked, being involved from the beginning. We knew we're a partner at the table. We knew exactly what was going to be required. We were called upon from the beginning to help organize things, to get the information out, to provide assistance to people. Our job is to, with Extension, is to help provide that information. We're also being in small communities along the river. We're out there throwing sandbags and mucking out houses and things like that. But from the professional level, being involved from the beginning. Unfortunately, the experience. We know what information, what's going to be needed. We understand the timeline of events. We've been through this before. The relationships we had both on the local level with everybody from the citizens to elected officials, state elected officials, the governmental groups, all these things, and our offices also serve as a contact point that residents can come to or call. We need help with this, and we were able to give them information of where to go, whether it's Red Cross, USDA Service Center, Salvation Army. We could help put them in contact with those resources to help them, at least get by the initial stages. Next, please. The lessons we learned is advanced planning is a must. This is something we tried to do after some blizzards in '05. We couldn't really get anybody involved. 2011, after the flood, we thought we would, but again, the COADs and VOADs, they all show up to help, but nobody wants to kind of plan this ahead of time, and we're really going to make a push for it. Our service assistance meetings were held a little later than they should have been because we spent the first 2 meetings organizing and doing groundwork that should have been done 3 years ago. So that first meeting we could have initially, got this thing started and got everything rolling. That planning is just critical to have something in order that you can go through and just start working down the sources of where you're going to get information, what the resources are. Communication, and I'll fall on my sword on part of this, is the point man for the University in Northwest, is I did not keep in contact enough with people on campus and really let the university know what was going on. We were far enough away from campus that they really weren't aware until about a week after, when I sent some pictures and some commentary down, and they're like, we didn't realize it was this bad. And then they have all rallied to our support. And the trickle-down effect is something that is the last thing I want to talk about that people aren't understanding, and we really need to make sure we quantify that from the start. We do this every day now, is I talked about the employment and how people who have lost their jobs because they worked on the other side of the river and can't get there. Our short-term recovery committee has passed out over $20,000 in gas cards to help people with the long travel. If they're working across the river at $10 or $12 an hour, they really can't afford to drive 2 hours each way every day to work. That's a real burden on them. We have families that have, some of them work for the agribusinesses, some of them work in other places. As soon as the schools are out, they've moved because those businesses are employing fewer people. There's less ag sales, there's less tax revenue, there's increase in county expenses, infrastructure, water and wastewater treatment plants were destroyed up and down the river. Some of them were 50 or 60 years old. And where a town of 300 suddenly finds the money to build a new waste treatment plant or new water treatment plant is to be determined. Schools, the enrollment, we're anticipating a couple of the flooded towns are going to have much less enrollment next year. And these are things that are going to continue and trickle down for years. As businesses were shuttered during the flood and still are, unemployment, things like that, as people leave, we're seeing that brain drain. So it's really a trickle-down effect. It's just not the homes that were flooded and the businesses that were flooded. It's everybody in the county that's taking the impact. And Extension is working with these people to try and help them, weather the storm, if you will, and be able to get back up and running. And I said our process is going to go on for a long time. And with that, well, I'll be glad to answer questions at the end.
Thank you, Jim. I know your part of the state has been impacted many times, having worked with Bev Maltzberger up there, and we feel for you. Some of the same areas I know are getting hit. Our next presentation is from Ashley Mueller. She is a disaster recovery coordinator and extension educator with the University of Nebraska Extension and part of our CED team here with Eden. So Ashley, take it away.
All right, thank you, Carrie, and thanks to the committee for inviting me to be a part of the panel today. This is one of the first times that I've really sat down and reflected, I think, fully and totally on what we've been dealing with here in Nebraska. Of course, have opportunities here and there, but really to think about what am I going to share in about 10 minutes time to give a good recap and overview of what we've been dealing with. So next slide. All right, so I felt like context was important. I also feel like I need to apologize to Missouri for sending a lot down their way. But the picture on the right is currently where we sit right now within the state of Nebraska in terms of our disaster declaration. So leading up to that, the article on the left, which I hope that we'll maybe be able to send you the slide set from today because I have linked that article, but two colleagues of mine put together this article that really provided a good background and overview of how we got to the map on the right, titling the article, Nebraska's Most Challenging 60 Days. In essence, we had a lot of wet and cold events throughout the winter. Our soils in March were really saturated. Rivers, lakes, all of that were frozen with like several feet of ice. So by the time that we had this bomb cyclone, which has already had been mentioned, things were not good. And there was equivalent, I think, in northeast Nebraska of about 2 to 4 inches of precipitation sitting on top of the surface. And there was really nowhere for that water to move in terms of into the soil, but just like out, and caused extreme river swelling and major flooding. So our current disaster, then we did get a disaster declaration actually fairly quickly. Our governor was able to work with our state emergency management agency and put an expedited request, which at the time, was really important in terms of mobilizing some of those resources, but it has proven to be a bit of a challenge on the backside because of all of the data, and the damage assessment that continues to come in requires those at the state level working on this disaster declaration to have to edit and go back and work on some of that paperwork. And so it has created definitely an arduous process. Something to note about our current disaster is that it really impacted 80 of our 93 counties, 5 tribal areas. And I think something that's even more important to note is the number of counties that have received individual assistance. So we're sitting at 27 counties currently. This is the second time in state history. Looking at the flood of 2011 was the first that we have received an individual assistance declaration. And so that means that there are a lot of Nebraskans that are very unfamiliar with, one, the terminology, and two, the process for applying for individual assistance. And so there's been a lot of opportunity to educate and explain, which has taken some time. But as a state, I think we're all learning this together. Next slide. So a few pictures that I wanted to share, perhaps you have seen the news or social media. There's been a lot of photos shared, but personally, I wanted to share my community. So Fremont on the left, we are just outside of Omaha, about 20 minutes drive. I essentially spent my children's spring break on an island. My community of 25,000 was surrounded by water, and so we could not go anywhere, and folks could not come in. And so that made for a really interesting experience. So that situation was created because of the Elkhorn River just to the east of where we are, and then the Platte River, which runs to the south of town. About 25% of my community was impacted. Thankfully, personally, I was not, but because my husband is also in Extension, he and I both got pulled in to help with the Emergency Operations Center. Him being the local county agricultural educator, worked on like grocery store inventory, working with those grocery stores to plan a convoy of grocery trucks that were able to come into the community a few days later. And then also worked with some producers on some carcass removal with some livestock. And then I was called in to help set up the volunteer reception center locally. And so I think in about 4 to 5 days time, we managed to register about 1,000 volunteers. And then since then, the state VOAD has absorbed that operation, which I've been thrilled with, and are posting on a virtual volunteer reception center, volunteer opportunities. I wanted to share these photos too. One from a colleague up in northeast Nebraska. You may have also seen a very large dam that broke. You can see all the large ice chunks that then not only do we have water everywhere, but then these really huge boulders of ice that certainly did damage in their own right. So quite shocking to see that. And then the photo at the bottom right is the actual Spencer Dam. That was taken from a Black Hawk helicopter, and you can just see all of the sand everywhere. That continues to be a problem and a headache for a lot of people today. Next slide. Again, just showing a lot of the roads that were damaged. This is one example. We've had a lot of state and county road closures. It just has caused a lot of problems and issues for folks either getting to work or taking care of livestock. It's just created a big problem there. Of course, Department of Transportation already had a slew of road projects on deck before this, and certainly having to rearrange to make sure that folks are able to get to where they're going. In some cases, roads were completely washed out, completely impassable. The middle photo is from social media. We did have instances where cattle were stranded due to water. And so the Nebraska National Guard worked with producers, and they were able to take the Chinook helicopter and drop hay bales in strategic locations to ensure that those livestock were well cared for. And then the final graphic on this slide is an infographic that NEMA, our State Emergency Management Agency, along with FEMA, have put together. Just a good overview kind of by the numbers. I think it's important to share that we've had about over $22 million in individual assistance that's been dispersed. FEMA has set up shop here in Lincoln, and they have 334 staff in Nebraska, and then we have about a little over 40 of other federal staff. So really working to engage. Right now, long-term recovery is a lot of what is happening, and so the FEMA VALs have been working, there's about 5 or 6 of them working at the local level, and I'll talk more about that here soon. So next slide. So in terms of our response, this is where I had a really hard time condensing down, because I feel like Nebraska Extension and the colleagues that I have the honor to work with have done so much to help Nebraskans really deal with what they have been going through. So at a statewide level, I kind of narrowed down about 5, 6 key things that we've been doing. In this time since March, we actually redid our flood website. We had some good information there. Some of it was dated from the 2011 work, and felt like this was a good time to really just overhaul. And so you can see the link within my slide presentation there, the flood.unl.edu. But for those that are currently dealing with flooding in your states, you're welcome to use the information. We did try to leverage our Eden partners and all of the capacity there, and send folks your way if your resource certainly applied to what we were dealing with. You know, a lot of what we also had determined within our system had to do with statewide communication and how we involved all of our folks, whether they're on campus and our research centers and in county offices, and help them get the information that they needed to be able to help their clients the best that they can. And so one thing that we noticed early on was a lot of emails being sent over our listservs, which was becoming really overwhelming for people. And so we ended up going with an internal newsletter that we currently send 2 times a week. It goes out on Tuesdays and on Fridays. And it includes key news releases, updates on resources, links to PSAs, all kinds of good stuff that we felt like it's easy then for folks to be able to refer back to. We have it in the nice university template, so it looks clean. And then there's an archive to it. So as folks have questions about something or needed to refer back, they can use our internal newsletter to really hopefully point them in the right direction. We also felt like in the time too, there was a lot that was happening. I mean, when you're talking 80 counties, you know, Extension is out there and is doing a lot, working with clients, working with partners. And so since probably early April, we have been administering a weekly survey that goes out on Fridays that simply asks folks, what are you doing? What have you been working on? What would you like to share? Programs, resources that you're developing. But then we go a step further and we've been asking, what questions are your clients having? What do you need help and support with? And we felt like this has been important in really having important dialogue within our organization about you know, how we need to be supporting each other. And then 2, really using that as a needs assessment too, and determining, are we seeing some themes and issues coming across either emails or phones and in-person you know, walk-ins that we could really start addressing more strategically from a team side. One thing that we did do as an organization, we purchased about 150 moisture meters that we sent then to county offices that were available and have been available for checkout for those clients that want to test the moisture in their homes and structures before they start any sort of construction project. So that has been, I think, a really great way to get folks in our doors as well. Of course, we have a lot more to offer than just moisture meters, but I think it's been a good way to raise awareness about what we do. And then finally, one other statewide thing that we have done is assembled a disaster team. You know, it was when the day that I got called in to help with the VRC, I'd realized, you know, this incident was shaping up to be bigger than I could handle myself. And so much like, you know, our county emergency managers recognize they're at their capacity, you know, they need resources from elsewhere, like the state emergency management agency. I essentially did the same thing. I called my dean and director. It was very understanding, very supportive. And you know, now at that point, we didn't realize 80 counties, but it certainly has been that. And so in that time, we've assembled a disaster team focused around each of our program areas. We have leadership that is engaging in about weekly meetings to talk about key issues that are emerging, but then also to kind of figure out again, how we're supporting the system and how we're you know, kind of looking ahead, bigger picture, and then doing some of that reflective discussions to really figure out where are our strengths and where are the opportunities. So I really appreciate that. And then I also, in this process, a good colleague of mine, Sani, I'm going to give a shout out to her here, has kind of been my right hand through all of this. She is an Eden delegate, and hopefully those that go to the annual meetings will get a chance to meet her at some point, but has just been a real big help for me too, as we've divided our program areas and really tried to liaise the best that we can with organizations like BOAD and our Department of Ag, all of those kind of state level groups. At the counties, of course, at the county level, of course, our folks have always been responsive, and this time has been no different. I am impressed by everything that my colleagues have done at the local level. It was said earlier, you know, and I say this a lot in Nebraska, that all disasters are local. You know, the folks know our local extension educators and staff. And so it's really important that we are there locally, and we have been. It's been through social media. Our folks have been really engaged on those platforms, Facebook and Twitter, sharing key information and messaging. There have been several multi-agency resource centers in the eastern part of the state, and our folks have signed up for time slots to be able to be there and to be able to share information and resources. And that is where that top photo on that right-hand side is from one of our marks in Omaha area. Of course, our folks have been developing resources, all kinds of information, public service announcements, even a youth volunteers guide. So just some really good stuff that has come from this. And then finally, volunteers. You know, Extension does really well with volunteer management with our Master Gardener program and the 4-H program. And so it just makes sense that we're involved in volunteer management after disasters. The photo on the right is from a colleague out in Platte County, so a couple of counties to the west of where I live. And they have been managing fencing, donation supplies, and then work with local producers there. And I just had to show the photo of these K-State volunteers, these students, right, that come. So just shows the power of the land grant system, the universities, and I think a good reminder to us that, you know, we really are like family, the land grant system. And so pretty exciting to see states helping other states. Next slide, please. So as far as helpful resources, I just wanted to provide, and I don't even think words can do this justice, how appreciative I am of Eden and all of the folks that some of you have not even met in person, and how great it was to hear from you as we were first responding to this incident, and now as we've been dealing with recovery. The knowledge that Eden possesses and individual delegates and members is just so fantastic. We've been able to use, for example, some experts in North Dakota State to talk about grain and stored grain and flooding. We've leaned on LSU for some housing information in regards to mold and remediation there. And then have also now been working with the housing specialist at University of Missouri, who's been able to help us answer some key questions as well about some housing issues. So those are just a few of the many ways that our Eden partners have certainly helped us. And I can guarantee there probably is a lot more happening that I'm not even aware of, just given the network of our folks in the different program areas, right? Like the 4-H Association and community development. In terms of additional helpful resources, I think the social media, I mentioned this a little bit ago, our folks being really engaged, but that has been extremely helpful. It has been we've been able to monitor different accounts and information, a lot of which are from our Eden partners, to be able to share that in real time. And of course, a lot of your state websites have some great information on floods as well, and those have just been extremely helpful to us too. Next slide. So a few reflections, and this again probably won't do justice to everything that I could talk about, but you know, one of the things that we've noticed early on and continue to notice is that data is here in Nebraska, but it is not here. And what I mean by that is, you know, so much of what goes into managing an incident and moving into response, from response to recovery, is data, right? Is how do we make decisions, who's impacted, and there is a plenty at our fingertips. But we've also learned that there, in some cases, is not a lot of coordination, or there's a lot of questions, right, about specific data. For example, on the agricultural side, you know, we are engaging with FSA and NRCS at the local level, but you know, there's some state data that we've not been able to get some clarity on, and we may not because of the impacts, right, that data can have on, for example, markets and other things. You know, in terms of some of these communities, there's a lot of self-reporting, and so what is the impact or the you know, scope of the damage? And so I think this is just a reminder that you know, this is something that could always be tightened up, but just I think a realistic challenge that we're facing. Communication is everything. As I shared, that was the reason for developing our internal newsletter. You know, working on a redo of our website is that information is important and information matters. And so I have spent a lot of time in my role the past couple of months emailing and phone calling and all the things, right, that we do in Extension, because it is important to maintain those open channels of communication to ensure that we're getting the information that we need, but that we're also being really good partners and sharing what we should be as well. Something else that may not surprise a lot of you that have been engaged with Eden know that the incident command system, it matters. This is something that I think, you know, we'll do a lot more reflection on this in our system. We're not used to working in a command structure in higher education, right? We have very horizontal leadership in most cases. And Extension, I think we can all agree, we love our jobs because we can follow our passions and our interests, and we can be really independent in our work. But when we shift to this idea of managing an incident and really being timely in our response, it requires a shift in the way that we're working. And that is hard, and it feels different. And those of you that know and have experienced ICS know how powerful and how helpful it is. And so this is a work in progress for us. I think this is an opportunity that we can certainly strengthen in the future, but I think we've done the best that we can, given our relatively unfamiliarity with working in this kind of space and this magnitude. So, you know, always an opportunity there. And then, of course, the formal process of reflecting, right? We've not had, if you will, a hot wash as a system yet, really thinking about our strengths and maybe where we could improve. I look forward to doing that because I think that is how we can make these adjustments going forward. But you know, right now we're very much we kind of transitioned from that response phase to very much now we're settled in this long-term recovery phase. And so working to mobilize all of our folks at the county levels in their local long-term recovery groups, but knowing that will look very different depending on where they are. And so I think as we kind of settle even more into this space, this will lend for some really good conversations. Next slide. And that concludes my portion of the webinar today. So I'll send it back to Carrie to facilitate the next part.
Thank you, Ashley. I will quickly turn it over to Mandy, and Mandy, you will have your full time, and we will stay on for questions after. Mandy Mahler is a county program coordinator with Fremont County, Iowa, from Iowa State University, and in the same general area as Ashley and Jim. And Mandy, tell us how you in Iowa have been handling this.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for inviting me. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because it looks like it's still muted. But anyway, I want to thank you for inviting me today. I really want to thank the previous presenters, and I especially want to thank Jim Crawford, your second presenter, for all that he shared, because so much of what we have experienced just north of him has been so similar. And I got to be honest, I'm just a little bit emotional after the three of them have all shared their stories, because this really has been just so devastating for our clients. So in this first slide is a picture of Hamburg, Iowa, just after the flood. So our flooding event occurred March 16th, and this was taken March 20th. You can advance to the next slide. And this is a picture of Pacific Junction. This is Mills County, Iowa, so north of us. And both of these communities are along the interstate and along the Missouri River. Pacific Junction kind of sits in a bowl. So they experienced flooding for a long time. And this was, you can see, about 15 days after the flooding. You can advance the slide. This is another picture from Hamburg, Iowa. This shows some of the devastating agricultural aspect of the flooding. These grain bins, the grain got wet and then the bins exploded, and there's no aid available for those lost crops that were in the grain bins. You can advance forward. And this is Percival, Iowa, very recently. They are still experiencing flooding. They're still underwater and they're still ordered to be evacuated. So imagine 60 days in and they haven't been able to make any progress. And it's very difficult, especially I feel like for our ag producers, to just sit with their hands tied and not be able to do anything towards recovery. You can advance. So as Jim had mentioned, the levee breaches kind of leave us wondering when we're going to continue, how many times are we going to continue to flood, and forces us to just sit and be patient. We have no levee protection, and it's raining again today, so continued precipitation, it makes this flooding event devastating and ongoing. Next slide. So even prior to the flood, ISU Extension and Outreach had acknowledged that there's a great deal of stress in our ag communities due to unfavorable weather patterns. We had an extremely difficult fall harvest and unfavorable market conditions. And so staff with ISU Extension and Outreach were invited to attend mental health first aid training. Next slide. Mental health first aid has the goals of introducing participants to risk factors and warning signs of mental health and substance use related problems, and building understanding of their impact, and also to demonstrate to participants how to offer initial help in a mental health or substance use related crisis and connect people to the appropriate professional, peer, social, and self-help care. So we're certainly not replacing the role of a mental health specialist, but we're, after taking this training, much better equipped to look for warning signs and to connect people to available resources. This 8-hour course used role-playing and simulations to demonstrate how we can offer initial help in mental health crises and connect people to the appropriate professional, peer, social, and self-help care. And we learned common risk factors and warning signs of specific illnesses like anxiety, depression, substance use, and then the rest are listed there, but those are definitely, we're seeing those with our flood survivors. Next slide. So one of our first lines of defense was to develop community meals. And fortunately here in Fremont County, Iowa, we are, we have all of our communities involved with Hometown Pride. We're a Hometown Pride county. And so communities were already organized in such a way that they had leadership teams. And they have been so instrumental in recovery. But we really wanted to help facilitate maintaining those tight-knit communities. And so we organized meals for affected communities, and we're finding that the benefits of those are they nurture the communities, even as the members are displaced, some of them in Nebraska, because that's where they work. Some of them are staying in other parts of the state. They're staying wherever they can find a place to stay. And so we encourage them to come back for their weekly meal and nurture their community. This is a great opportunity as they're gathered together for us to share information and resources. So if there's an update on from FEMA or from emergency management, this is where we can share it. We can provide maybe a basket of clothes that's been donated, and they can sift through that there. We've brought in someone who specializes in yoga and breathing exercises to help bring down their stress levels. So various resources and information have been shared there. And it's also another opportunity for people to offer each other emotional support. I find that the thing that people want the most is to know that somebody cares. And so they're getting that at these community meals. And then it provides an opportunity for caring volunteers to help flood survivors. If you've responded to a disaster, you know that there are a multitude of people that want to help. And so giving them an opportunity to do so is very helpful. And then of course it provides a free meal to flood survivors. Next slide. Here are some pictures from some of our community meals. We can see Hamburg, which is one of the communities that was impacted by flooding. The 4-H club from there actually prepared a meal for Percival, which is another community impacted. We have the Easter Bunny visited because, you know, life goes on. So we wanted the Easter Bunny to come in and bring some smiles and some gifts to the flood survivors. And we had a special treat when Randy Cole, who's originally from our area, she is now Mrs. Kansas 2019, but she visited and she brought some supplies, and she just really lightened the mood and lifted the spirits of our flood survivors. Next slide. So we were declared, we received a federal declaration very early, and so part of our FEMA resources has been a grant that was issued to provide long-term mental health assistance to flood victims. And so through that grant, 6 people have been hired to cover Fremont and Mills counties, and those employees have been conducting outreach. So they go to wherever they think they will run into flood victims and share resources. So maybe they're at the gas station or at the ball fields where there are games going on, supply centers, and then our community meal sites. And they also are visiting campsites where survivors are temporarily housed. These employees are sharing resources that are available to anyone experiencing stress, and also, you know, Eden resources and things like how to recover from a flood. But focusing on the mental health aspect, Iowa Concern Hotline, Hope for Iowa, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Crisis Text Line, we are so thankful for all of those resources already being in place. Next slide. Iowa Concern Hotline, which is an extension program, has seen a 32% increase in calls when comparing April 2018 to April 2019. And I assume that trend has continued well into May as people are really starting to understand the long-term effects of this flooding event. Next slide. In Mills County, they're developing a mentorship program called Family to Family Moving Forward. So the concept is that they will pair flood survivors with supporters. The families or the recipients will be similar. So if it's a young family with young kids, then they'll be mentored by a young family with young kids. The supporters, the volunteers, will undergo a 3-hour training that will be conducted by ISU Extension Outreach's mental health specialist. And then as they get started, the participants will meet with their mentors weekly in the first month, and then at least monthly until the need subsides. Next slide. So because this is such an ongoing disaster, I anticipate that our response in 3 months from now is going to look a lot different than what it has been so far, but it won't dissipate. Our opportunities to identify and respond to the needs of flood survivors will be ample throughout the next couple of years at least. We anticipate that new ideas will come from the county's long-term recovery teams. Next slide. That is all that I have for my presentation. I look forward to any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Mandy. It is always great to hear about all of the different things that we are, that Extension as a system is doing. I would encourage any of our participants, if you have questions for any of our presenters, please type them into the chat box. I will start it off. I know that Nebraska and Iowa have declarations, and Tom said that Mississippi does not. Jim, does Missouri? You said that you have not gotten a declaration yet, or you
Nope.
have?
Missouri got their federal declaration for public assistance last night.
Okay, and do you have individual assistance yet? Do you
No,
know?
they have not got to that yet.
Okay, and just so I know, we have some people on the line that may not be aware of the difference between public assistance and individual assistance. Public assistance typically goes to governmental bodies to repair infrastructure, those types of things. Individual assistance goes to citizens impacted, citizens and businesses impacted by the disaster. So that is the difference between the two types of declarations. Do we have any questions? Or did all of our presenters do such a fabulous job talking about what they've done? We have no questions. Okay, and Abby has asked, and this is for Jim, what are you seeing as the biggest difference between 2011 floods and this year's floods? Because I know a lot of the same areas are impacted.
What we're seeing so far is the water is much deeper. It's much earlier in the season, and we're anticipating it lasting much, much longer. 2011 was so unusual. It flooded June 20th. It was here for about 3 months and left. We were able to get back to it. We're already past the 2-month mark. There's no sign of it going down any farther than it currently is. The levees, they haven't even addressed all the holes. They haven't even assessed them, let alone talked about how they're going to patch them and fix them. So we're seeing water probably going to be on the bottom. Just the duration of it is going to be unbelievable. And the damage to the roads, like I said, we have a lot of heavy trade with Nebraska, going, headed west, and in northern Kansas. And with all the bridges being cut, they've got a few open now, but it is really starting to hurt the businesses that depend on the employees from there, just the business in general from those areas. But the duration is what is really, is really hurting this.
You have our empathy. That is horrible. From Becky in North Dakota, how are your state extension organizations making sure staff take care of themselves, not just everybody else? And I'm assuming Becky is addressing that to all 4 of our presenters.
I can start this first. I mean, I think, I shared about our weekly survey. That is a really good opportunity for those of us that get that data to be able to look at that and see who is specifically kind of doing a reach out, because we give them an opportunity, share with us how you need help. But we also know that sometimes in extension we serve and then we feel called to serve. And so our folks don't let us know when they are having troubles. And so one of our team members on our disaster team is a unit leader representative, so the point person for our county offices. And so she's been asking those unit leaders to send information her way or are in touch with them, as well as we do have one of our supervisor level positions, administrative team members, a district director as well, that is in contact with the other district directors. So we're trying to monitor it in different ways. Just like Iowa, we are also prioritizing mental health and working on some team projects related to internal opportunities, as well as working with clients. And so definitely it is fluid, but we know it is a priority.
Thanks, Ashley. Tom, has there been any work done for those of you down in Mississippi? I know you've been under the gun for quite a while now. We don't. Are you there, Tom?
Yes, I'm all right.
Yes.
Carrie, our composition of our disaster strike teams is such that they are deployed for 5 days and then they're off for 5 days, then back on. So what we have tried to do when we started in February was make sure that after they had gone through 2 rotations, we would have a after action hot wash debriefing and let them vent more than anything else, and try to recoup what they believe normalcy would look like and their role in it. We have tried to maintain contact with especially those extension personnel, educators on the Mississippi River side that have been inundated with floodwaters and seen so much difficulty among their clients. And one of the programs was a mental health program that involved taking clients that had been under flood conditions to a neutral site so that they could have a warm meal, fellowship, a little entertainment, a little respite from the drudgery that they were facing. And we did that on a weekly basis. We've had some success with that, and I think it helps our extension educators as well as our clients that we're working with. But yes, we make sure that there is a hot wash debrief session to clear the cobwebs and the things that the experiences have produced to make sure that there's a little psychological first aid, for lack of a better description.
Thanks, Tom. Mandy or Jim? I know you guys are still in the middle of it, but how are you dealing with that?
Well, I would respond that our state office has been very supportive, so we've appreciated that. We have an employee assistance program and encourage our staff members to use that. They're welcome anytime and receive any services that they need through that. And then I really make it a priority to have our staff meetings because that's a time for people to debrief, to express the stress and the drudgery, I like that word, that we as staff members might be experiencing. We were very fortunate that none of our staff members directly were affected by the flood. So we're just a little bit stronger to be able to help people pick up the pieces that were directly affected.
Yeah, and I notice Ken Hellevang, who is also at North Dakota State, has made the comment in the chat box that they have been encouraging colleague communication to pick up on long-term fatigue, and I know they've experienced a lot of flooding over the years in Fargo, so I know they've dealt with this issue as well. Jim, are you still on? Has there been talk in Northwest Missouri in terms of dealing with this ongoing?
Yeah, well, our administration has been very supportive of all the efforts and everything we're involved in. You know, any resources they can bring to bear. You know, it's one of those where we've had to put aside a lot of our normal extension programming that we do. You know, they've supported the decisions we made to, you know, whatever you need to park to on the back burner for now to handle the immediate needs. This is, you know, a priority for them. From the president and chancellor on down, we've been encouraged to do whatever we need to do, but also to make the time for ourselves and take care of ourselves. So they've, you know, they've tweaked their expectations for us and have been supportive. So, you know, we feel, you know, I know I'm seem to be the point man up here for this thing, and you just have to make the time to let yourself decompress and get back away from it. But with the support of administration encouraging that, that really makes it much easier for us to do that.
Thanks, Jim. I want to thank everybody. If there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and sign off. I do want to remind everyone that you will be receiving a link for an evaluation for this program, and encourage you too that this will be posted on the Eden website as soon as the recording is done. If you want to go back and listen to more portions, or encourage your colleagues to hop on and take a listen to the webinar. Thanks again for our presenters, and I'm always amazed at the way our Eden Network helps each other, and hope that we can continue to be support, and hope that we see fewer disasters from here on out, and hopefully your waters will recede. Thanks again. We will be sending out those evaluations and encourage you to join our June webinar. You will be getting that information very soon. Thanks all.